The principal looked straight at me and said, "Mrs. Carter, you are an unfit parent." The room went completely silent. Not the casual quiet of a meeting. The heavy kind. The kind where people suddenly stop shifting in their chairs and pretend to read the papers in front of them just to avoid eye contact. And in that moment, every person in that room believed him. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. But here's the strange part. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't defend myself. I just sat there and waited. Because I knew something he didn't. And in less than 2 minutes, he was about to discover it himself. Have you ever been judged by someone who thought they knew your entire story? Someone who looked at a few pieces of paper, a few observations, and decided they had you figured out? That was exactly what was happening inside the small conference room at Brookdale Elementary School that Tuesday morning. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The air smelled faintly like dry erase markers and old carpet. Across the table sat 3 people. Principal Richard Holloway, age 56. A tall man with silver hair, a stiff posture, and the kind of voice that sounded like rules were built into it. Next to him sat my daughter's teacher, Lauren Patel, 31. She kept adjusting the stack of papers in front of her like she wasn't sure what to do with her hands. And on the far side was Dr. Hannah Brooks, the school counselor, 44, watching me carefully the way psychologists do when they're trying to read a reaction before it happens. Then there was me, Elena Carter, 38, single mother, and apparently, according to the man at the head of the table, a bad one. The meeting had been scheduled 3 days earlier. The email was polite. Professional. Parent conference regarding behavioral concerns for Maya Carter. My daughter Maya is 9 years old. 4th grade. Quiet. Observant. The kind of kid teachers often describe as mature for her age. But over the last few months, something had changed. At least, that's what the school believed. Principal Holloway slid a folder across the table. Thick. At least 30 pages. Reports. Observations. Concerns. He cleared his throat. "Mrs. Carter, we've been reviewing Maya's recent classroom behavior." I nodded. He continued. "There have been several patterns that worry us." That word. Patterns. If only he knew how ironic that was. Ms. Patel began reading from her notes. "Maya has refused to participate in group activities multiple times." Another page. "She frequently corrects teachers during lessons." Another page. "She isolates herself during recess." And then the line that seemed to matter most. "She recently submitted a written assignment that raised concerns among staff." Dr. Brooks leaned forward slightly. "We're not accusing anyone of wrongdoing," she said gently. But the tone told a different story. Principal Holloway folded his hands together. "However," he said, "when children show consistent social withdrawal, oppositional behavior toward authority, and certain themes in writing, we have to consider the possibility that something in the home environment may be contributing." There it was. The accusation without quite saying the accusation. Until he finally did. "Mrs. Carter," he said, looking directly at me, "based on what we're seeing, it's possible Maya may not be receiving the support she needs at home." I tilted my head slightly. He continued. "And to be completely transparent, that raises questions about parental fitness. Unfit parent." Just like that. A sentence. A label. Decided by people who had known my daughter for 8 months. Now let me ask you something. If 3 professionals sat across from you and calmly suggested that you were failing your child, what would you do? Would you defend yourself immediately? Would you argue? Would you demand proof? Most parents would. But I didn't. Because while they were reading their reports, they had overlooked something. Something already sitting inside that very folder. Something none of them had actually read yet. And the moment they did, this entire conversation was going to flip upside down. Principal Holloway tapped the stack of documents. "We've compiled teacher observations, disciplinary notes, and a psychological screening summary," he said. Then he opened the folder. 1 page. 2 pages. 3. He read quietly, scanning line after line. The room stayed still except for the faint ticking of the clock above the door. Ms. Patel shifted slightly in her chair. Dr. Brooks watched his expression. Then suddenly, he stopped. Just one page deeper into the file. His eyebrows pulled together. He leaned closer to the paper and read a single line under his breath. The change in his face was immediate. The confident authority he had been carrying for the entire meeting slipped for just a second. Then he slowly lifted his eyes from the page and looked directly at me. The room felt colder somehow. Finally, he spoke. "Why," he said carefully, "wasn't this included in the report you gave me?" And just like that, the meeting everyone thought was about my daughter's behavior became something very different. But before he could understand what that line really meant, he still had one assumption about me that he wasn't ready to let go of. And the next thing he said would make it very clear that he had already decided exactly what kind of mother he thought I was. "So, let me ask you something. What kind of parent stays silent after being called unfit?" That's what everyone in that room was wondering. You could see it in their faces. Principal Richard Holloway sat upright again, but the confidence he had a moment earlier was starting to crack just slightly. Not enough for most people to notice, but enough for me. Ms. Patel glanced from him to me confused. Dr. Hannah Brooks, the counselor, leaned back slowly in her chair, studying both of us like she was trying to solve a puzzle. Because the energy in the room had shifted. Just seconds earlier, this had been a disciplinary meeting. A simple narrative. Concerned educators. Troubled child. Possibly negligent parent. Case closed. But that single line in Maya's file had interrupted that narrative. And Principal Holloway didn't like that. He cleared his throat and shut the folder halfway, as if buying himself time. "Before we address that document," he said carefully, "I want to make sure we're staying focused on the primary concern here." Interesting choice of words. Primary concern. He looked straight at me again. "Your daughter's behavior." There it was. Even after seeing something unexpected in the file, he wasn't ready to abandon the story he had already built in his mind. Have you ever noticed how hard it is for people to let go of their first assumption? Even when evidence starts pushing in the opposite direction. Holloway slid a sheet of paper across the table. "Maya has accumulated 5 classroom incident reports in the last 2 months, he said. Ms. Patel nodded slightly. He continued. In one case, she interrupted a math lesson to correct the teacher. He flipped another page. In another, she refused to participate in a group science activity. Another page. And she has repeatedly chosen to sit alone during recess. He looked up. To many educators, these patterns suggest social withdrawal combined with oppositional behavior toward authority. Oppositional behavior. That phrase hung in the air like something clinical. Like my 9-year-old daughter was suddenly a case study. Dr. Brooks folded her hands together. We're also concerned about Maya's written assignment last week, she said. She slid a printed sheet toward me. I recognized it immediately. Maya's essay. The title sat at the top in neat handwriting. Patterns adults don't notice. Dr. Brooks tapped the page lightly. Several teachers found this essay unusual. Unusual. That's one way to put it. Ms. Patel shifted in her chair. She wrote about observing mistakes adults make repeatedly, she explained. Then she read a line from the essay. Adults often repeat incorrect information because no one wants to correct them. Children notice this, but learn to stay quiet. Ms. Patel looked up from the page. We felt this suggested a level of distrust toward authority figures. I almost smiled. Distrust toward authority. That wasn't the problem. The problem was something far more uncomfortable. But they weren't ready to hear that yet. Principal Holloway leaned forward again. Mrs. Carter, he said firmly, children who challenge authority this frequently are often reflecting what they experience at home. There it was again. The subtle accusation. He continued. Is there anything happening in your household we should be aware of? I held his gaze. No, I said calmly. The room went still again. Ms. Patel blinked. Dr. Brooks tilted her head slightly. Because that answer didn't fit the story they were expecting. Most parents, when confronted like this, start explaining. They talk about stress, or family problems, or changes at home. anything that might justify the child's behavior. But I had given them nothing. Just one word. No. Principal Holloway tapped his pen against the table. You understand, he said, that withholding relevant information doesn't help your daughter. That was almost funny. Withholding information. If only he knew. I glanced at the open folder in front of him. You already have everything you need, I said. Ms. Patel frowned slightly. Dr. Brooks leaned forward again. But Holloway's eyes narrowed. Then perhaps, he said, we should review the entire file together. Finally, he turned the folder fully toward himself again and began flipping through the documents. Teacher reports, attendance records, behavioral notes, page after page. The clock on the wall ticked quietly. 30 seconds passed. Then 60. The tension in the room slowly grew thicker, because something about my calmness was starting to bother them. Have you ever noticed that when someone stays calm in a confrontation, it makes everyone else nervous? Holloway reached the section divider near the middle of the folder. A gray tab labeled in small capital letters. Confidential assessment. He paused. He said. His tone suggested he hadn't expected this section. He pulled the pages out. 3 sheets. Professional letterhead at the top. The name printed clearly. Dr. Michael Reeves, educational psychologist. Holloway began reading silently. At first, his expression stayed neutral. Then his eyes moved to the next paragraph. And suddenly, his brow tightened. Ms. Patel noticed. What is it? She asked quietly. He didn't answer. He kept reading. Another line. Another pause. Then he went back to the top of the page and read the first sentence again. Slowly this time. Finally he spoke. But not to the room. To me. His voice was lower now. Controlled. Mrs. Carter, he said, why wasn't this included in the report you submitted to the school? I tilted my head slightly. Which part? I asked. He tapped the paper. This line right here. Ms. Patel leaned forward instinctively. Dr. Brooks adjusted her glasses. Holloway read the sentence out loud. Student demonstrates advanced cognitive pattern recognition scoring within the 99.8 percentile. The words hung in the air. And for the first time since the meeting started, no one spoke. Because the story they had been telling about Maya Carter was starting to fall apart. But they still didn't understand the real problem. Not even close. And the next question someone asked in that room would reveal something none of them were prepared for. Have you ever wondered how quickly people can make up their minds about you? And how stubbornly they hold on to that first impression, even when new evidence appears? That was exactly what was happening in that meeting room. Principal Holloway looked at me like he had just discovered a small crack in a dam. One line had shaken his narrative, but he wasn't ready to abandon it. Not yet. He cleared his throat and leaned back in his chair, trying to regain control. Mrs. Carter, he said, let's continue. Let's focus on the concerns that prompted this meeting. The concerns. That word. It felt like a hammer hitting me over and over. The room shifted its attention back to the folder in front of him, as though the rest of the evidence could somehow support the story they had already written. Ms. Patel picked up where she left off, reading from her notes in a measured voice. Maya has refused to participate in group activities in science and art. She often sits alone during lunch and recess. She corrects teachers in class, and we've documented several behavioral incidents. Behavioral incidents. Not curiosity. Not intelligence. Not observation. Incidents. They had taken a series of normal, if uncommon, behaviors and interpreted them as signs of failure. And they were looking at me like I had failed her. I sat quietly, letting them talk. They couldn't see the truth yet. Principal Holloway leaned forward again, tapping a pen on the table. Refusing to participate in class activities, challenging teacher instructions, isolating herself socially, these are classic signs of a child struggling with authority. Often, these behaviors indicate a lack of stability at home. The room was quiet. Too quiet. I wanted to ask a question, but I held my tongue. Instead, I watched their faces, noticed their small tells. Holloway's slight frown when he read my calm demeanor. MS. Patel's involuntary bite of the lip when she realized I wasn't responding defensively. Dr. Brooks adjusting her glasses as she tried to measure my reactions. They were trying to solve a puzzle, but they didn't realize they were holding the wrong pieces. Holloway pulled another page from the folder. Your daughter's essay, Patterns Adults Don't Notice, raised concern among staff. Several statements suggest she perceives adults as unreliable and inconsistent. In combination with her social withdrawal and classroom behavior, we have to consider the possibility that the home environment is a factor. I almost smiled. Misinterpretation had never looked so formal. Mrs. Carter, he continued, can you help us understand if there's something going on at home that could explain these behaviors? I looked at him calmly. No. The room paused. You could feel the internal calculations racing behind every pair of eyes. They expected me to provide excuses. Stress, divorce, illness, something to justify why my child appeared to be struggling. But I gave them nothing. No defense, no explanation. Just one word. No. It was too simple. And yet, in its simplicity, it created a crack in their assumptions. Holloway's pen tapped faster now. You understand, Mrs. Carter, that withholding information about home life can have serious consequences for your child. I didn't flinch. You already have everything you need. The words seemed to confuse them. Ms. Patel's eyes widened slightly. Dr. Brooks tilted her head, trying to figure me out. And Holloway, well, his jaw tightened ever so slightly. He turned the folder toward himself and began reading the documents more thoroughly. Page after page. Teacher notes, disciplinary reports, observation sheets. Nothing alarming. Nothing that fully justified the narrative they had been constructing. Then, finally, he reached the sealed section. The tab read Confidential Assessment. A small label in black ink, precise, professional. Something they hadn't read yet. He flipped through it quickly, scanning the paragraphs. And then he stopped. Ms. Patel and Dr. Brooks leaned forward instinctively. Holloway read one line again. Slowly. The sentence seemed almost to hang in the air, heavy with meaning. Student demonstrates advanced cognitive pattern recognition scoring within the 99.8th percentile. The words were simple, clinical, almost dull if you read them on paper. But the effect in that room was anything but dull. The staff froze. The certainty that had filled the room was gone. The narrative of a problem child and negligent parent collapsed in seconds. Holloway looked up at me, trying to mask the shock, the subtle realization that he had been about to make a major mistake. He asked in a low voice, "Why, wasn't this included in the report you gave me?" And in that moment, the story changed. The child they had been discussing was no longer just a student with behavioral concerns. The mother they had been judging was no longer just a parent on trial. But there was more. Much more. Because while they saw intelligence in Maya, they didn't yet understand the implications of it. They didn't know what her observations actually meant. They hadn't seen what she had been quietly noting every day. And the next thing I would reveal would show them that the problem wasn't Maya's behavior at all. It was something much bigger inside the classroom. The room was tense. The clock ticked. And as Holloway held the page in his hand, you could feel the quiet before a storm. Because what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Have you ever had a moment where everything you thought you knew about a situation just flipped? That's exactly what happened in that conference room. The principal, Richard Holloway, had just read the line in Maya's file that made him pause. Student demonstrates advanced cognitive pattern recognition scoring within the 99.8th percentile. Say that out loud. Try to imagine it. A 9-year-old child, quietly observing, quietly thinking, quietly recording the world around her, performing at a level nearly unmatched among her peers. And the adults in the room had been misreading her entire existence. The energy shifted. The confident authority Holloway had carried for the past 10 minutes, the authority that had allowed him to call me an unfit parent, faltered. His brow furrowed. He leaned back in his chair as if the weight of that sentence had just landed on his shoulders. Ms. Patel looked down at the papers on the table, trying to regain composure. I didn't realize, she murmured, almost to herself. Dr. Brooks adjusted her glasses, peering at me with a mixture of curiosity and caution. That Explains some of her behaviors, she said, slowly. I didn't say anything. Because if they thought the story ended with that line, they were wrong. They had no idea. Let me explain. Maya's intelligence wasn't just about numbers or test scores. It was her ability to notice patterns that no one else did. Small details most adults overlooked. Repeated behaviors. Tiny inconsistencies in what people said versus what they did. She remembered conversations verbatim. She saw the logical gaps others ignored. And because she noticed these things, she often reacted differently than her classmates. In class, it looked like defiance. Correcting teachers. Refusing group work. Sitting alone at lunch. Misunderstood behaviors that educators saw as social withdrawal or oppositional attitudes. But in truth, Maya was simply observing. Calculating. Protecting herself from a world that didn't always make sense to someone thinking 4 steps ahead. I finally spoke. Her behavior isn't what you think it is. The room went quiet again. Holloway's eyes narrowed. Explain, he said. I took a breath. Maya notices everything. She sees patterns in the classroom, in her peers, in the way adults handle situations. She wrote that essay, Patterns Adults Don't Notice, not out of malice or cynicism, but as an observation exercise. She's highly intelligent. Gifted. And what you're reading as behavioral problems are actually signs of boredom and frustration. Her mind moves faster than the pace of the classroom. Holloway shifted in his chair. So you're saying, what? That all these reports are wrong. I smiled faintly. Not wrong. Misinterpreted. Dr. Brooks tilted her head. If that's true, why didn't you share the psychologist's report with us earlier? I looked down for a moment. Because I was advised not to. Her psychologist warned that revealing her advanced abilities too early could make her socially isolated. It was a protective measure. To keep her safe. Now the dynamic had completely flipped. The narrative of a negligent parent was gone. The accusation had evaporated. Instead, the room felt almost defensive, as if they were realizing they had misjudged both Maya and me. Holloway's voice was quieter now, tinged with something like hesitation. So all the behaviors we were seeing were indicators of high intelligence, not a troubled home? Yes, I said. Exactly that. Miss Patel, still holding the essay, leaned back in her chair. I see it now. I didn't realize she was analyzing the classroom so thoroughly. I thought she was disruptive. Holloway exhaled slowly, running a hand over his forehead. And the essay. Patterns adults don't notice. It wasn't a warning sign. It was an analytical exercise. Exactly, I said. Maya's mind works differently. She isn't behaving badly, she's observing and processing information at a level that exceeds the classroom's expectations. The counselor scribbled a few notes on her pad. Then she looked up cautiously. And yet, she's unhappy in class? I nodded. Yes, because the classroom environment doesn't challenge her. And because she's starting to notice patterns in how students are treated unfairly, how mistakes are ignored, how rules are applied inconsistently. She's sensitive to injustice, and she keeps quiet because adults rarely listen. Holloway's face changed. He flipped through the notebook she had brought, the one I'd instructed Maya to keep. Every observation, every date, every detail of incidents in the classroom, logged meticulously. He scanned a few lines aloud. Tablet broken on September 12 th, blamed on student A, but observation indicates student B was responsible. Hallway fight October 3 RD, student punished incorrectly. He paused. His tone had changed from accusation to shock. She documented everything? Yes, I said softly. She notices the patterns and keeps track. She's protecting herself and, in some ways, she's protecting other students too. The realization began to settle in. This wasn't just about intelligence. This was about truth. About accuracy. About a child seeing the discrepancies adults were overlooking. Holloway closed the folder slowly. The weight of the meeting shifted. What had started as an evaluation of parental fitness was now a revelation about the child's extraordinary perception and the school's blind spots. But even as the room tried to absorb this new reality, another question lingered, one that nobody had asked yet. And it was the question that would push the meeting into territory no one anticipated. Because seeing Maya's intelligence was one thing. Understanding what she had been quietly observing, that was something else entirely. And the next thing I revealed would show the staff that the problem they thought they were investigating wasn't my daughter at all. Have you ever stopped to consider what a child really notices when you think they're not paying attention? Most adults assume kids are oblivious, that they only see what we allow them to see. But Maya, she notices everything. Every pattern. Every inconsistency. Every tiny detail adults take for granted. And she remembers it. After the initial shock of the psychologist's report, the room had gone quiet. Principal Holloway sat back, staring at the folder in disbelief. Ms. Patel's hands hovered over the essay, hesitant to touch it again. Dr. Brooks blinked repeatedly, as if trying to process the implications of what they had just learned. I finally decided it was time to reveal the most important part of the story, the reason Maya's behavior had been so misunderstood all along. Her observations don't stop with essays or worksheets, I began. Maya has been documenting patterns in the classroom for months. She notices which students are blamed unfairly, which incidents are misreported, even when adults overlook mistakes. She keeps it in a notebook. I slid a small blue notebook across the table. The leather cover was worn but neat. Holloway hesitated, then picked it up, opening it to the first page. Dates. Observations. Names. Every entry detailed with precision. Tablet broken September 12th. Holloway read aloud, frowning. Blamed on Carlos Ramirez. Observation shows tablet was already cracked. Hallway fight, October 3rd. Punishment given to Jordan Whitaker. Actual incident involved 3 other students. He looked up stunned. She recorded all of this? Yes, I said. She keeps track because she notices what's happening and she wants to make sense of it. She's been protecting herself and, in a way, other students too. The room had shifted completely. The narrative of a parent failing a child was gone. Holloway's expression softened, tinged with both guilt and amazement. Ms. Patel's eyes widened as she turned pages, reading lines detailing incidents she hadn't fully understood before. Dr. Brooks scribbled furiously, probably already considering how this changes the counseling approach for Maya. But here's the crucial part. Seeing intelligence on a test isn't the same as understanding what it does in the real world. Maya's notebook revealed something far more unsettling for the adults in the room. The school's handling of certain students was flawed. And she had noticed it all. Some students are consistently punished unfairly, I explained. Maya internalizes these patterns, and she withdraws rather than confronts them. That's why she avoids group activities, why she sits alone. She doesn't trust that adults are accurately observing reality. Holloway's face paled slightly. So her withdrawal wasn't defiance. It was observation. Yes, I said. And she documented it meticulously. The essays and the behavioral reports you've read are fragments of a much larger picture she's been quietly recording. Ms. Patel finally spoke, her voice a mixture of awe and shame. I didn't realize. I thought she was disruptive, difficult. I had no idea she was noticing the inconsistencies in how I handled situations. Dr. Brooks leaned forward, her tone softer. This is extraordinary, but also explains why she's frustrated. A child who sees patterns adults ignore feels powerless when those patterns repeat. I nodded. Exactly. And that's why she appears unhappy in class. Not because of her home, not because she's troubled, but because the environment isn't fair, isn't accurate, and isn't designed for someone who thinks like her. Holloway closed the notebook slowly. The weight of it settled in. This wasn't just about misreading a gifted child. This was about the school misjudging its own actions, misreporting incidents, and almost mislabeling a parent as unfit. The room was silent. No one knew what to say. Even Holloway's voice, usually authoritative and unwavering, was quieter now. Finally, I added the last piece. Maya isn't just a child observing patterns. She's a student pointing out truths adults overlook. And she deserves to be understood, not judged. The principal exhaled. He leaned back, running a hand through his hair. Mrs. Carter, we may need your daughter's help." A shiver ran through the room. That statement didn't just acknowledge her intelligence. It acknowledged her insight, her perspective, her quiet documentation of reality. At that moment, I realized something. What started as a meeting to discuss behavioral concerns had turned into a revelation about the school itself. They weren't just learning about Maya, they were learning about their own blind spots, about their assumptions, and about how easily adults can misinterpret a child who sees more than most of them ever will. And as the meeting drew toward an end, one thought lingered in my mind. And should linger in yours too. What if the person you've been judging silently for months has been noticing the truth about you all along? Because Maya had been. Do you remember the first line of this story? The moment the principal looked at me and said, "You are an unfit parent?" That line had hung over me like a shadow for the first few minutes of the meeting. Every eye in that room seemed to agree with him. But the truth, what actually happened, was about to rewrite everything. After Maya's notebook was revealed, after the psychologist's report was read aloud, and after the staff finally understood the depth of her observations, the atmosphere shifted entirely. The accusation of parental failure evaporated, leaving a room full of adults forced to confront their own misjudgments. Holloway, who had started the meeting with authority, was now quiet, reflective. He had seen evidence of intelligence and meticulous observation that challenged every assumption he had made about both my daughter and me. He looked at me again, his voice steadier now but tinged with humility. "Mrs. Carter, I see now that we misinterpreted your daughter's behavior. And by extension, we misjudged you." It was not an apology shouted or dramatic. It was quiet, sincere, and it carried weight. In that moment, I realized that the meeting hadn't just been about Maya. It had been about authority, perception, and assumptions. I spoke then, softly but firmly. "The behavior you labeled as problematic wasn't rebellion. It was intelligence, observation, and careful documentation. Maya has been quietly protecting herself and others, noticing patterns you all overlooked. That is not a failing, it is a strength." Holloway nodded, turning to Ms. Patel and Dr. Brooks. "We need to reevaluate how we handle students like Maya. Not just in her classroom, but across the school. There are systems and policies that need reviewing." Ms. Patel's eyes glistened slightly. I understand now. I misread her entirely. I thought she was disruptive, but she was trying to make sense of the world. Dr. Brooks added thoughtfully, "We should implement a review of disciplinary practices and develop enrichment programs for students like Maya. Ones who think differently and notice patterns others do not." I smiled faintly. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the shift from judgment to understanding. Later that evening, at home, I sat with Maya. She looked at me with quiet curiosity. "Did I get anyone in trouble?" she asked softly. "No," I said. "You helped people see the truth. That's all." She nodded, her small face thoughtful. I could see the relief in her expression, the validation that she had been right, that noticing things mattered, that intelligence and observation were not mistakes but gifts. The school implemented changes as promised. Disciplinary cases were reviewed. Teachers were briefed on how to better identify gifted students and how to support them without judgment. And Maya? She was placed in a district enrichment program designed to challenge her mind without compromising her well-being. But the most important thing wasn't the policies or programs. It was the recognition that the quiet child in the corner, the one adults often ignore, sees more than anyone realizes. That the parent who says little, who remains calm under accusation, may already understand what is happening and how to protect their child. As I look back on that meeting, I realize how fragile our judgments are. How quickly we assume we know someone based on limited evidence. And how one line, a single sentence in the right file, can completely change our perspective. Holloway's final words to me still echo in my mind. "Mrs. Carter, we may need your daughter's help." Those words acknowledged not only Maya's intelligence, but her agency, her insight, and her quiet power. So, here's the truth. Sometimes the people you judge most harshly are the ones quietly noticing the world, recording what you miss, and protecting others without ever drawing attention to themselves. And sometimes, the parent who appears silent is not ignoring a problem, they are waiting for the right moment for the truth to speak for itself. And now I have a question for you, the viewer. What would you have done in that meeting? Would you have defended yourself immediately? Would you have tried to explain your child's perspective? Or would you have stayed silent, trusting that the truth would eventually reveal itself? Because that's what I did. And it changed everything. Sometimes it just takes one sentence, in the right file, to shift the narrative completely. One line to prove assumptions wrong, to expose the truth, and to demand that everyone see things differently. And that's exactly what happened that day.